Hello and welcome to the Memory Capsule podcast, where we interview members of the Pokemon trading card game community. My name is Rafal Gladys. Each week, we'll be speaking with our guests about their background with the Pokemon TCG, how they got involved with the game, and give them an opportunity to share their love of the game. Today's guest is Kevin Krueger. Kevin is the Limitless Invitational champion, which they won after playing through multiple online qualifiers when in-person play shut down in 2020. Kevin also qualified for the Players' Cup 3 Global Finals and helped create the Arceus Corviknight deck that saw success during the Sword and Shield 2 Brilliant Stars format. Kevin also happens to be a doctor when they're not busy playing the Pokemon TCG. How are you doing, Kevin?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Rafal.
Of course, glad to have you. For anyone who is being introduced to you for the first time, what would you like our listeners to know about you?
Oh, good question. I like to play weird decks and build decks and try to be accessible. So if you want to reach out on social media or say hey, I'm always down to chat about the game. And it's good to have this opportunity here to talk as well. Being a doctor is a little strange sometimes. There's not a ton of crossover between my hobby here and my career. So any chance to talk about that is a good time in my book. So.
Awesome, and that's definitely something we'll try to touch on in just a little while. To get us started, I just kind of want to jump onto a very particular question. If I were to ask you, what is your favorite card of all time for any reason, whether it's art, whether it's gameplay, whether it's, any particular attachment you have to it, what would your answer be?
And my answer is Metagross GX. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but it was the first competitive IRL deck I ever built. Before that, I was exclusively an online player. This is back in, I think, Burning Shadows came out. So when I was playing this, I had run into it on the ladder. And I'm like, this is the coolest deck ever. So I got the cards on PTCGO, started playing those, really enjoyed the deck, and then I, took the plunge, signed up for a regional in Memphis 2017, 2018, one of those years. And that was my first in-person event. So that card is just special to me because uh, one was a really fun deck to play, but also just sort of pushed me from this being just a game that I play on my computer when I have nothing else to do, and sort of expanded it into being something I travel for, meet some of my best friends, and something that brings me a lot of joy, when I'm not at work. So.
Awesome, I love that so much. And honestly, it kind of perfectly transitions us into our first main discussion point, which is how did you get into the game? It sounds like you were already playing online by the time you got into it around 2017, 2018. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so I was in medical school back in, when did I start? 2014, 2015. And this is X and Y era. I had this phase in the summer. I had some time off. I downloaded an emulator on my computer and was playing old Game Boy games. And when I was a kid, I played the Pokemon trading card game cartridge. Ironically, people have been talking about that online some recently with Nintendo Switch Online expanding to include that. The thing is, I didn't have friends who wanted to play the game with me as a kid, so I only had experience on that cartridge. So I went back and played through the game, had a blast. This is 2015 or so. And when I finished, I thought, you know what, you can probably play people online nowadays, and that would be super fun. So I go into the App Store, search for Pokemon Trading Card Game. PTCGO shows up. Download it. Go through the tutorials, play a theme deck, and then with a couple of the theme decks I bought with coins and a couple of the random packs I had opened, I built this really silly deck with Powerful Friends Miltank and a Victory Bell that you could discard a grass energy and confuse and poison, I think it was. And I played that deck for like 250 games over the course of the rest of the summer. I just being able to play against an actual human on the other side was such a game changer, and I was kind of hooked from that point on. But I was busy the next couple years with medical school and didn't have time to really expand out until that Burning Shadows era. I decided, what, this is enough fun that I want to try to start spending some of the free time that I do have actually going to tournaments. At that time, I was looking for competitive deck lists as well, and I found tricky gem. It was called Darium's Competitive Pokemon at the time, throwback to that. But had a Metagross GX deck list for me to copy, and I used that as a guide to kind of buy all those cards on Troll and Toad, and they all came in the mail. It was a big deal. I didn't have any poison markers or anything, so I actually bought one Elite Trainer box just so I'd have like dice and a poison and burn marker, because I thought I gotta have at least some stuff if I'm gonna show up to a tournament.
Yeah, you're like actually really starting from scratch, because I know
Yeah.
recently everyone's always saying like, be attentive at regionals. You may be playing a first-time player. I've met a lot of people myself who said they got into the game online during COVID, but you were that 5 years ago. Kind of just stumbled into the game and went from there.
Yeah, it was great. I don't usually buy a lot of packs to open, but that Elite Trainer box kind of got me started. And then with the individual cards I bought online, I had one deck for months before I decided to branch out to a new one. But once I went to that first regional, just the experience and playing competitively in person and meeting people just really brought a whole new level of excitement and passion and joy for it. I remember I got top 256 in that Memphis tournament with a ridiculous Metagross GX deck, and I got championship points. I was so excited uh, with a 414 record. New player issues, too many ties, but
I can relate to that one. I think I got 4 ties at Milwaukee, which was my first regional back since
yeah.
COVID.
A couple months later, I had a no. That was the end of that season in Madison. I went 306
Really?
playing Malamar.
It
Yeah,
was
that was a trip.
it's 15 match points.
Yeah, yeah,
Could be worse,
not
right?
bad.
Definitely
Forward to
could be
get there.
worse.
I was bragging that I was the only undefeated person in the tournament. I think
Oh,
maybe
nice.
technically it was true, but
That's funny. I love that. That is also interesting that you kind of started from playing regionals instead of playing at a local level.
mhm.
Where were you at the time when you were in medical school? Were you in an area where you could start going to competitive tournaments locally, or were you mostly a regionals player at that time?
Good question. So I was in medical school in Indianapolis, and I actually did have a locals that was absolutely stacked. Um, Aaron Tarbell and Justin Zimmerman were always there. I met Sarah Beckwith there as well. That was a good local store. So I did go to some league cups there, and my first time was actually just a local night when I had gotten most of my cards in the mail. And so I did play a couple times locally before the regional, but I got those cards specifically with that Memphis regional in mind. So that was always the goal to kind of get there. So I got some reps in at locals beforehand, which was nice. I really missed having locals once I moved for residency to Southwest Michigan. There just were not any competitive stores nearby at all. So at that point, for the next couple of years, I was exclusively a regional player.
Mm. At what point did you kind of go from being a player who went to the tournaments they could, followed the game competitively a little bit, to a player who was really looking to try to get a Worlds invite and taking the game very seriously?
So that transition happened before the pandemic. So 2019 to 2020 season, which ended up being the 2019 to 2022 season.
Yes.
Ridiculous. But what had happened, I went to several regionals in the fall. The timing worked out where I was on an easy rotation. I had a weekend off. I made day two twice in a row, and then followed that up with a top 256. So with three regionals I had gone to, I had 130 match points or championship points, I think. And this was by like early January. And so I figured, well, if I've got this many points already, maybe I'll start going to league cups and driving an hour or two to get to those because I didn't have a local store. And I decided to push for it and was making really good progress until the pandemic shut everything down. I was up over 300, 330 championship points, I think, when the lockdown hit. And so I was able to have a lot of success during the pandemic playing online. So that was fun. It's probably what I'm most known for in the game now. Um, but the transition to being a really competitive player had actually started about 6 months before.
Gotcha. Okay. I see. It's quite the journey you went through, especially then having to come back and pick up from that point and try to wrap up that Worlds invite, which is definitely
Mhm.
not easy.
Yeah, it was definitely a transition trying to get back into the game. It really was unfortunate that when tournaments started up again, there weren't any local events. I basically had enough cup and challenge finishes left to finish off my invite just with those local events, but of course they didn't restart. So I was at my 300 something and trying to get the rest only at regionals and internationals, which I almost got there. But if I had started from the beginning of the season going to local events, I think I would have had my invite, before the shutdown even happened.
Of
The way
course,
that
yeah.
I was accumulating points, but the way I see it and I felt about it is even since I started playing in 2017, I felt I was a world's championship qualifier caliber player. It's just circumstances being a medical school and residency. I don't have a lot of time for going to a lot of events. So you can get championship points at every event, but if you're only going to a handful in the year, you're not there. Uh, I've been sort of looking forward to a time in my life where I will be able to go to lots of events and finally get that invite because I know my conversion rate is good enough. It's just been life gets in the way sometimes.
Of course, you do have a very busy schedule, I'm assuming.
Mhm.
Obviously, even though in-person tournaments shut down in 2020, the we saw the birth of a pretty robust online circuit where you were able to kind of have this victory in kind of the pseudo 2020 World Championship, which was the
Yeah.
Limitless Invitational. Could you tell us a little bit about the history of you getting invited to that tournament and what that process was like?
Yeah, so that was a blast. When the lockdown happened, gosh, so many emotions from that time. So I work in healthcare, right? You're on the front lines. COVID affects you. I was never of a mindset of like, oh, we should keep having tournaments right now. Like, I'm there. I get it. It's the right thing to do. But I also, from a hobby standpoint, I had just started to really gain momentum with getting my championship points built up. I'm on track for my Worlds invite. I had a trip lined up to go to UIC in Berlin, which I was really excited about before they got canceled. And, just the whole rug was pulled out from under me instantly by the pandemic. And when Limitless came out with their announcement for the Invitational series, it was, I mean, great production value and everything. Shout outs to them. The hype behind that was so real. The community was really looking for something to take the place of the world's chase of having regionals, and the response to that within the community of people showing up to these, being over 1,000 people in each qualifier. It felt like as good as we were going to get at that point of an approximation of what a regional would be like. And the idea of trying to be in the top 16 out of a couple thousand people playing in these qualifiers was such an exciting goal to kind of shoot for. And as soon as they announced it, I thought, I'm going for it. I didn't expect to make it because I've never had that high of finishes in competitive events, but I knew that I was good enough as a player to have a chance. And then with it being an online format and me being an online player at my roots, and being open deckless, a lot of those played to my strengths as a player, and I think that helped as things kind of went along. I was able to get top 8 in the first qualifier. I forget how many people were in that one, 1,100 or so. And that's probably the best finish I've had in a very large tournament. There was a lot of positive variants that kind of went my way, but it was super fun to kind of have that, big finish in a high profile event. The community was really following these closely at the time. And once I got that top 8 to start, I figured, all right, we're going to get there. And I didn't expect to win the invitational, but I wasn't surprised at that point to end up qualifying, just being off to such a good start and being really confident in my abilities as a player.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, by the time that everything shut down at that point, I had kind of, for me as a originally in-person player, not an online player, it was very difficult for me to make that transition. I think I played a couple Hegsters and then just spent the rest of 2020 playing old school RuneScape. So I had no idea that these 1,000 person online tournaments were happening and that you had managed to win the whole invitational.
Mhm.
Do you think you already kind of mentioned it, and I'm assuming I kind of know the answer, but how much do you think your roots as an online player helped with your success?
It's definitely a big factor. Like my finishes online have always been consistently higher than playing in real life. And I think it's for a couple reasons. One, I just have so many more hours and time logged on the PTCGO client. I'm very comfortable with it. In those couple years since downloading the app and actually playing in tournaments, I was playing pretty regularly online, and slowly started to follow more with the competitive scene. And I've always felt confident in playing the game that way. It simplifies certain things for you. Price checking is very easy, and you can take notes and play optimally based on those prizes without a lot of effort. Or I'm not good at that in an overstimulating in-person environment. The other thing that really I think made a big difference in these events was there's an open deck list, which before that point hadn't really been a thing. The reason they did it, it's totally reasonable, is you can't deck check 1,000 people, so you have to rely on the players to deck check each other by having open deck lists. But that changes the strategy significantly, so you can track your opponent's resources very precisely when you know their exact 60. And having access to that information allows me to play to my strengths better of attacking the weak positions on their board. And it's something I'm not great at in real life, is predicting what other people's counts are going to be, exactly how their deck is built, and um, playing around that perfectly. Where with an open deck list, it was pretty easy for me to do that. And so my win rate online, it's a good 10% higher, and I was able to make some good meta calls and get some good luck and play very well. I was very focused for those events. I don't think it was totally a fluke. Definitely had some luck go my way, both to qualify and in the invitational. But it was also a function of really dedicated preparation and confidence in my ability to play in that specific format. I think I'm a world class player with those conditions.
I think definitely, as we saw. Yeah, for
Without
sure.
that, it's I'm world's qualifying caliber player, but that's different from like a top 16 stipend chasers. I'm just not on that level IRL, and that's
Hmm.
because of circumstances, I think, and inability to really get the reps in. And also just kind of the way my brain works. I get distracted in the big convention centers, to where if I'm locked in, focused on my computer, I just am a better player in that scenario. So,
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. There's definitely, a lot of different factors that are at play in the online tournaments. For some people are a better environment, for some it's can be more distracting. I'll have two
mhm,
monitors open and sometimes it's tough for me to stick on one screen. So, there's advantages and disadvantages to all of it and kind of depends on the player a little bit.
yeah.
When it comes to you eventually becoming this, I mean, I'll say world class player. I'll just without any qualifiers, I'll just say right
Mhm.
now,
Okay.
what helped you eventually grow into a player like that? If someone else is looking to grow at the pace that you were able to grow at, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the biggest factor for me is just being passionate about the game. I've enjoyed it so much my whole life whenever I've had the chance to play it. And that drive to improve your deck list, to improve, how you make meta calls, to improve your gameplay and recognize mistakes when you make them. That I think has been the biggest factor, is I have kind of gradual improvement just through getting lots of experience and playing lots of games because I love to play the game. So I don't have maybe great tips, um, for someone who doesn't have as much drive to practice and play the game and just enjoy it for what it is. But that's been the biggest thing for me. I guess some really specific advice that I found really useful. There's an old YouTube video by Seagrove TCG. Great guy. I wish I got to meet him at some point. But he interviewed Tord Reklev around the time he had won his second or third international. And Tord had a great comment about optimizing deck lists. He said if you play 10 to 12 games with a deck and you don't use a card once, you should really be cutting that card for something else,
Mm.
more consistency or a better tech. And when I heard that, I was still in an early mindset when I was listening to that, and I would try to tech for everything and kind of win every single matchup, and try to cover as many meta decks as possible. Which is not always the best strategy. If you're not using a card regularly, you should turn it into something better. So when I do run dozens of games when a deck really captures my attention, I'm always optimizing the list based on that kind of mentality of, if the card is not being used regularly, find something better. And the other thing I've gotten a sense for is, as you're playing a lot of games with a deck, you can get a feel for the weaknesses of it. If you need to, draw better, you need more draw cards, more consistency. If you're, weak in the mid game or you don't have enough damage output, you might look for a tech attacker in certain situations. But I'm constantly assessing the strengths and weaknesses of my deck. Not only for what the deck is missing, but also if there's extra of something in the deck. If you're seeing too many draw supporters or too many Pokemon search, then you may be able to cut something and provide a more powerful card in that deck slots space. And so it can kind of go both directions as far as making the deck more streamlined or making it more complicated. And that's always based on play testing for me. I'm not the best at theory. If I haven't put in 50 to 100 games online with the deck, I'm probably not going to play it super well. But if I am in that mindset of constantly updating, optimizing the deck, and then I know it in and out, and I have sort of a personalized take on an archetype, then those are the times I tend to perform the best with a certain deck.
It's really interesting. And I will say, having talked to you a little bit about deck building in the past, and Dan Huger, who you've also worked with in the past a lot on decks, a lot of the things you've mentioned I've heard referenced in regards to the Arceus Corviknight deck that you guys built for Indianapolis. Could
Yeah.
you talk about how some of those deck building strategies played into building that deck? Because a lot of the stuff you mentioned in terms of, figuring out a consistent strategy, knowing what to drop, knowing what's important, theory crafting a deck, a lot of that I've feel like I've heard that kind of reference in regards to that deck. Could you tell us a bit about how that came to be?
Yeah, so Arceus Corviknight was actually, I think, a really good case study for those concepts I just talked about. So, for context, I was starting to test for IRL tournaments once they were coming back. My friend Braden Elfert, now regional champion, is kind of one of the first friends I've had in the game. I met him playing online. And he and I were testing together. He had a good day two finish with Arceus Malamar VMAX. And so I sort of took his list and was fiddling around with it. And as I was playing games with it, I was finding very frequently that I was losing due to having weak starts, slow starts, and that what I wanted was more draw potential. And so I started adding, Crobat, Luminion to the deck for consistency, which helps you get off to a fast start. And then what I realized after adding that to it is, well, if I'm going to be benching these liabilities, I kind of need to win the game quicker because it's not working very well with Malamar VMAX two-shotting things. So I was looking through, some of the new cards, and there was a Lucario V-Star, which had a really strong damage output of, 240 damage to any Pokemon V. And you put a choice belt on that, you're at 270. And then with the Zigzagoon ping, now you're hitting 280 and knocking out most of the things, in the format. And what I learned, within a dozen games of swapping out the Malamar VMAX for Lucario V-Star is that aggression is really strong, in the format. And especially aggression was very strong with Starbirth. And the decks that had been popular at the time with Arceus were typically more defensive builds like Arceus Inteleon, trying to loop Sharon's Care and search for things to set up your board and sort of tank and heal and extend the game out. But there wasn't any Arceus decks that were using Starbirth to punish opposing players with slow starts or to really attack decks and put them on the back foot. And the Lucario V-Star was just really, really good at that. So Dan and I had played that to EUIC after, I think I probably had 100 to 150 games of tweaking the list and sort of mastering the archetype. And at that point, we had the barrel engine and two Crobats and a Crobat VMAX for the Mew matchup and a Luminion to search for boss's orders to close out the game after you've already Starbirthed. Um, and the goal of the deck really was to be able to boss KO a 220 HPV Pokemon with your initial Arceus attack on turn 2. And so the list was optimized to do that, and most decks just didn't have a great comeback for that when you're loading up Lucario at the same time and going up 2 prizes. And the deck was very good at that with the engine that I had kind of built through uh, just morphing that Malamar list over the course of a couple weeks into something that I wanted to build based on what I was sort of missing. The reasons I was losing test games were because of lack of aggression, because of lack of draw consistency. And so it sort of turned into this really aggressive Arceus deck, which was really fun to play. I really enjoyed it. UIC didn't go quite as well as we'd hoped. We fell just short of points. It was a weird tournament because the player count was low. But anyway, out of that, stay a little bit focused here. Frank Persich had gotten second with Whimsicott. And so going to the next tournament, which is Indianapolis, we felt that Lucario was significantly weaker since you would get KO'd by the Whimsicott and they lock your special energy. Dan actually lost to Frank in day 1 of EUIC. And so we couldn't find anything better to play. We had brought Arc Lucario to Indianapolis. We're like, this is the best deck we have. We're going to roll with it. And like the night before, Dan, or on the drive over, we were carpooling. He said, what about Corviknight? Which I had not thought of at all,
Yeah, he will bring up some interesting cards. I've tested with him as well. He's like, what about this? I'm like, oh, I haven't even thought about that.
And so that's the beauty of a testing group is, you guys have different ideas. And, the engine was mostly for my testing, but that change to the Corviknight was genius. It was so good in the meta and absolutely stomped Whimsicott for one. But also it was good with its ability into, decks that wanted to sort of ping you for damage and set you up for a 2-shot. You're not affected by any abilities like quick shooting. And yeah, the Corbin was just really good, and that was completely Dan's idea. He was still uncertain of it on the drive, but after I had thought about it more, like, this is just strictly better, so let's do it. And if you could come up with something a little more unexpected, that's always a plus too. And I won a round in Indianapolis because my opponent used Echo Horn on a Crobat. He was playing Mew VMAX. Great guy, great opponent, and he just didn't know what the Corviknight VMAX did, and he was scared of it. He's like, I'm not putting that on the bench, so he puts the Crobat on the bench. I'm like, thanks, I powered up.
Oh my
Evolved to a
gosh.
VMAX and sweep his board. And that was game 2. I was down a game, and then I won game 3 as well. With Path to the Peak, it was a pretty favorable matchup, but he had the series locked up if he didn't misplay because he was scared of the Corviknight. Doesn't know what the card does,
Yeah, I mean, sometimes just the unknown factor is just enough. Had you just not evolved to the VMAX at that point, and he didn't
Yeah,
know what was going
I
to
hadn't
go?
shown him it yet, so it was. It's not a card I used in that matchup. You're trying to go, Crobat and lock him down with Path to the Peak. So that was Michael Bergerac, great guy, really fun round. I almost felt bad, but also it was, it's day 2. You gotta you gotta take what you can get.
For sure, because at that point he's probably just racking his brain like, what is that even?
Mm-hmm.
Do I know that card? Does it have a
Yeah,
VMAX?
that was because that was the first tournament that we had played it, and the card hadn't seen any competitive play at all before.
Yeah, and then eventually, I mean, I just looking at Limitless, the list did end up having some success with other players. You ended up playing it again at Secaucus. And then I saw that it made a top 32 in Vancouver by Zach Lesage. A player got top 4 in Vancouver with the list, so
Yeah.
a pretty good call all throughout the Brilliant Source format.
Yeah, and I think that's a testament to a couple things. One, the aggressive Arceus engine is actually legitimately very strong. And I'm proud that that sort of came out of my individual testing. The other thing is, within that specific meta, the Corviknight was just really good. So it had its moments, certainly. It was a little bit of a high roll deck in that, going first is a big deal for it. But if you got positive variance with it, yeah, you could beat pretty much anything. And it's just a really fun deck to play. So that was a lot of the feedback I got on it afterward is like, oh, this is just, it's great. It's super fun. That was my experience with the deck too. At the end of the day, I'm doing these things for the joy of it and trying to have as much fun as possible at tournaments. And usually I get that more with, a creative, interesting deck than I do with something that's strictly meta or especially what's considered the best deck in format. I tend to perform worse with those for whatever reason. So,
Yeah, especially considering the size of tournaments now. If you make
mm,
day two, you don't want to just hate yourself for 15 rounds.
yeah. It's and the way this my life is set up, I'm busy with work a lot of the time. When I'm not, I want to be having as much fun as possible. Recharge and do what brings me joy. And playing weird decks at Pokemon tournaments, that's something that does that for me. So
That's fantastic. I love that. Following your pretty incredible success at the Limitless Invitational, we saw the Pokemon Company then create their own online tournaments with the Players' Cups, and you were able to qualify for the global finals for Players' Cup 3. Could you share a bit more about that experience and what that was like?
yeah, I'd love to. So the first Players Cup was a little bit convoluted as far as how to qualify. I had just finished winning the Limitless Invitational, and I wasn't super motivated to keep grinding. And so I just didn't attempt that at all. But by the time Players Cup 2 came around, I was interested in, testing seriously and playing competitively again. And this was around the time that tag teams and VMAXs were ruling the format. And it's an era that people don't necessarily look back fondly upon. When every deck has 3 prize Pokemon and 4 Crushing Hammers.
Yes,
Um,
this is Crushing Hammer Pikarom era.
yeah, yeah. And, Luke Metal with or without Crushing Hammers. And then Eternatus VMAX was playing Crushing Hammers. It was a whole mess. Anyway, me being who I am, I played some of those decks. They weren't going super well, partially because I wasn't enjoying myself, but also it was kind of just the nature of the format is very high variance with big swings. Uh, Good old ADP, got to mention that ADP hammers, good times, right?
Yes.
And so I'm
I'm very,
thinking,
very lucky I did not play during that time.
yeah, you did miss out. I think that
Yeah,
actually may have been a world's format if not for the pandemic. So,
yeah.
one
Hey,
positive.
ADP eventually won Worlds, so we're all good.
Eventually. So I'm trying to figure out how am I going to play this format and not lose my mind or continue to enjoy myself, right? Because I can just do other hobbies. I have only so much time available when I'm not working, still in residency at this point. So I start looking through the card pool and thinking of ideas I had. And I thought, ADP can't beat you if they can't do any damage. So I pulled out this card called Decidueye with Deep Forest Camo. Blocks all damage from Pokemon V and GXs. And I said, you know what? I'm going to qualify for Players Cup 2 with Decidueye. So I've been playing on the ladder for a while. I was trying to get the list sort of optimized before I started using my keys because you had limited number of keys to qualify for the region finals. Is how the format was. If you weren't playing at that time, and I played in a Play Limitless event, which was fairly new at the time, um, and I had thought of a way to beat Luke Metal, which was cool because what would usually happen is they use their GX attack and then put metal goggles on, and then they have 30 resistance. So your Decidueye does 0 damage, and it's a stall, and one person decks out first. I said, well, if I never deck out, then I'll beat Luke Metal 100% of the time. So I played a Manaphy in my deck to this is another thing too, is I had been looking at cards, and when I saw the Manaphy, the first thing I thought of was, oh, this is a way to never deck out. And that's going to be useful at some point. So I throw this in there. I just crushed through this Play Limitless event. It was the funniest top cut I've ever played in. I faced 3 Luke medals in a row and decked them out 6 times with Manaphy. And I actually won $400 cash.
Really? Wow. Wait,
yeah.
which Manaphy was this?
It has Whirlpool Suction. I don't know what set
Oh,
it's
that's
from.
the Fione, which is
Yeah.
basically
Oh,
Manaphy,
sorry.
but not
Yeah, it
Manaphy.
is.
Might
Yeah,
as well be Manaphy. All
you're
right,
probably
sorry. I
right.
was just like,
I,
what
I
Manaphy?
haven't played
What?
BGC in forever. They're the same to
Oh, you're
me. It's a
totally. They
little,
might as well be. You're good. You're good.
little blue guy.
Continue.
Yeah, and so I win the event. I was facing Danny Altavilla in the finals, decked him out with it. The next day, Danny picks up the deck, changes a couple cards, finishes first place out of 100 people again. Like, the format was not ready for Decidueye. And this was before Play Limitless had really taken off. So, people weren't adjusting the meta really quickly like they are now. And I ended up grinding through like my last 25, 30 keys with Decidueye and qualified pretty easily. I was kind of middle of the pack of top 128 for Players Cup 2. And I still was feeling like I don't like the format. I'm just going to keep playing this. And I managed to get top 16 in NA. And I actually lost in that Players Cup 2 qualifying to a Luke medal that had teched for me, I think with a big parasol. So it wasn't affected by Fione's ability, or they had an attacker that could damage me. Yeah, the tech that had caught on was Galarian Stunfisk, I think.
Really?
Yeah, it was a single prizer that could, damage Decidueye and not take any damage coming back.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it was one of those techs got me. But top 16 in NA was pretty good with a deck that I kind of invented. And then once it was a known quantity, it was significantly weaker. And, this was around the time on social media, people started having those graphs of how good Decidueye is.
Decidueye cycle, yes.
Yeah, the Decidueye cycle. I'm proud to say, and now it's publicly, I started the Decidueye cycle, and it did start out on top. It was very, very good for that time frame. And for Players Cup 3 qualifying, it was not as good because people were teching for it. And I played Pikarom with hammers and didn't love it, but it felt like it was at least a little more skill-based than the other 3 prize decks in the format.
As skill-based as Pikarom hammers can get.
Relatively, right? Yeah, because you could paralysis late game and, set up big tag bolts. And I barely qualified for top 216 or top 128 in NA. I made it in by like a couple of points on my last couple keys and did not enjoy myself. And when the region finals came up, luckily for me, Decidueye had kind of come back up in the cycle and it was actually good again. So I say, you know what? How am I going to beat a field of 128 competent players? I need to finish top 2 in order to advance to global finals, or top 4 out of 128. And I said, I'm not going to be able to do that with a meta deck. I just, being realistic, there's too much variance. I'm not going to be able to do it reliably. But if I play Decidueye and I hit good matchups, I could make it. It's actually my best chance of finishing top 4 in this event.
As long as you're in the right spot in that cycle, you got a shot.
Mm-hmm. And it was an interesting tournament because some top players had decided to play Centiskorch, which is a very bad matchup. I had teched for it, but it's still a bad matchup because they have Volcanians. And luckily for me, Centiskorch bombed, and nobody was in the top tables. I had hit Pikarom, Eternatus. I had an interesting match against Eternatus and was able to snipe their one prizers. The really fun thing about playing this Decidueye deck is I had sort of come up with the idea to put Birdkeeper in the deck so that early game while you're setting up your stage 2s, you can snipe 60 damage with the Rowlet and take out the opponent's one prizers that can damage your Decidueye. And then at the same time, you attach energy to your bench Rowlets before they evolve so that you can, start using Splitting Arrow once you get your rare candy. And Rosa was a really good card in that deck too. So it was Rosa Birdkeeper Research Engine. Really fun deck to play because of the sort of counterplay. Anyway, I hit a really great run of matchups, and a couple of the games were streamed, which was really fun to see commentary over my deck and my games. And I ended up with a 14 wins. I was 7-0 match record, and I think I only lost one game.
Wow.
I had sort of was facing ADP with Mawile, and they got me with that. I tried to play around it, but yeah, it was something else. It was really high roll of matchups, but it was really cool to make it that far with a deck that I came up with and had kind of refined over the course of several months.
Eventually, then you were able to make it to the Players' Cup finals, and I
Yeah.
know you ended up in the top 4 playing Victini. Could you tell us a bit about how that went?
Yeah, so I think I actually finished 5th, or knocked me out of the
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes,
travel
I think
award
that's
for
right.
that. So after I had just, advanced with Decidueye, I knew from experience we're dropping down on the Decidueye cycle now, right? So it's not the play. Because if 2 people tech for me, it's not good anymore. So I had to find something else. I'd been playing some Welder decks since the card came out, and I was comfortable with kind of the engine, the approach. Victini was a new card, and I guess it was somewhat similar to picking Decidueye. My mindset was, how do I beat really good players? Being an above average player myself, but if I just play a stock 60, I'm not winning this tournament, and so my game plan here, since Decidueye was a worse option, is, well, I'll just go full aggression. I hope I go first and can use a lot of bosses orders for 220 damage on evolving Vs, which actually worked for a couple of rounds. I came up just short in my winning into the travel award against Pikaram. I whiffed a welder after sequencing correctly and drawing a bunch of cards. You whiff welder, your deck's not good. So that one hurt to miss. And then I faced Tord. I had actually beaten him round 1 through some good fortune, and I played well in that series as well. But I kind of had awkward draws, and Tord was playing Cinchino Urshifu and dominated me 2-0. And I think he got like 3 travel awards out of the 4 Players' Cup, something ridiculous. But props to him. I had a good run. I think 5th out of everybody trying to play in Players' Cup 3 is a result I'm really proud of. And I wouldn't change anything, if I were to go back. There weren't any big mistakes. I sort of chose to play a high roll deck, and the high roll only carries you so far. So
Of course. Yeah, and that you mentioned kind of the similar thing with the Corviknight deck. You just kind of got to hit sometimes, but if you do,
yeah,
it does its job, right?
yeah. But that's part of you got to be able to choose what are you willing to lose to. And with Decidueye, the concession that you give playing that deck is if people hard counter me or I hit fire decks with Volcanion, I'm probably just going to lose. And so if that had happened, I would have lost. I would have said, you know what? I knew that going in. It's fine. But you can't beat everything. So you can either try to play the best deck and outplay people, which is a great strategy for some people. I don't have the mentality or the time or the testing group to really succeed that way. And so I'm proud that I've been able to sort of forge my own path of being creative and coming up with other ways to counter decks and play with my own style and have success that way by sort of being willing to take some of those risks. And when the Corviknight deck was succeeding, everybody, upon looking at the list, every single person would ask me, how do you get away with benching Crobat and Luminion? Don't those get boss KO'd? And I was thinking back to my Indianapolis run, and I didn't lose a single game the entire tournament to getting a Crobat boss KO. Because the thing is, you're ahead on prizes, and they have to deal with your attacking threats, or you're just going to sweep and win the prize race. Because the deck is designed to play from ahead, and so if your early turns work, then those liabilities just don't matter. But you do with the Corviknight deck and that aggressive engine, you lose to bad starts. If you do just get bad hands and you brick, you have no comeback potential, you have no healing, you have no tanking options, you just lose. So those games you scoop early and you try to win 2 out of 3. You go first the next game. That's a big advantage. So a little bit of good luck can take you a long way, whether that's with your matchups, with your draws, with the coin flips. But depending on the format, you got to pick one of those you're willing to lose to. This is assuming you're not a top tier player who's professional and coaches 40 hours a week and has a testing group with the best players in the world, and you can just play the best deck and beat people by being better than they are. I don't really have that luxury because I'm a doctor, and I don't enjoy playing meta decks a lot of the time. And my purpose here is to have fun. Part of that's being competitive and winning, but another important part of it is just doing what makes me happy and being willing to take some of those risky picks with your deck choice, with the build of your deck, and saying, if I lose to this, I lose to it. I won't lose any sleep over it because I've accepted that going in. But that gives me, I think, some potential for really big finishes that I wouldn't have otherwise. Because if I wasn't doing it my own way, I wouldn't have that Limitless Invitational win. I wouldn't have the Global Finals appearance that Decidueye got me to. And so I'd encourage people to try to be creative, have fun with the game. Dan knows this. Anyone who's tested with me knows this. Out of every 10 ideas I have, 9 of them are really bad and they don't go anywhere. And so, in a sense, there's some wasted time there. But the ones that hit can be really good. And that's part of what keeps me coming back to the game. There's just so many options in the card pool and potential for making interesting choices. I think I'll be playing the game a long time because of that.
Could you tell us a little bit about your life as a doctor, and then maybe how it affects your ability to play Pokemon? Are there any lessons you happen to be able to connect from the game to your career? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, first of all, thanks for asking me that. That's something I actually think about quite a bit, and just very rarely have the audience to listen to an answer to a question like that. At work, I have to stay professional most of the time, which is fine, and hobbies don't come up except in passing. Pokemon events, we're usually focused on the game, talking about things. I generally try to keep my work-life balance pretty separate, but I have thought about, why is it that medicine sort of brings out the best in me and is something I'm passionate about and good at, and what are the similarities there with my other hobbies like Pokemon or um, playing strategy video games is another thing I'm really into. And I think the common denominator, I suppose, is I really like problem solving and pattern recognition. So there's something in my brain, the way that I process the world. Um, I like to see how things connect and tie together. I'm very much a big picture thinker. And what I found as a kid with video games is it gives me a set of rules that I can analyze and optimize and improve the process and have that sense of progression. It's built into video games, and it always just captured my imagination and my focus, and it was my favorite thing in the world growing up. And as I moved into college and trying to decide what I wanted to do with my life, I learned from some work experience. I want to work with people, but I also want to be solving problems. So medicine is such a complicated field of analyzing objective data, but you're also working with the subjective experience of people. And those kind of puzzles are very complicated, and similar to with video games, I can take all of the information available, analyze it, and come up with an optimal game plan, and get better at doing that process more quickly, more efficiently, more accurately. And so I have a sense of progression, in my career, and I figured I would have that when I chose to go into medicine, and I have experienced that as well. Now, to bring it full circle into Pokemon, I think the Pokemon trading card game just interests me on the level of trying to predict what other people are going to play and trying to counter those strategies. So there's so much information out there about what is available in a given meta that it just really activates that part of my brain that wants to analyze data, solve problems, and optimize a play style, a meta call, a given deck, and that's one of the things that is very, I think, intrinsic to my identity as a person, and to be able to express that through my hobbies and my career is really important to me and brings me a sense of joy and cohesion in my life. And if that's meaningful to other people, that's great. Pokemon's not the most high stakes thing, but I still care a lot about the community, and I want it to uh, be healthy and happy and welcoming to people. And I want to be able to contribute to that through my experience in the game. So talking about it and performing, coming up with new ideas in the game is a great thing. And then obviously in medicine, you're helping people at their time of greatest need. A lot of times, they're very vulnerable, being ill, and being able to be an expert and come into that situation, provide a sense of structure, to provide a plan, and also just some reassurance and empathy is something that makes it worthwhile. It's not just a job; it's a calling and a passion, a way to help people, while also being interesting enough for me that I could do it for a long time.
Wow, that that's quite the answer. I don't even know how to respond. Thank you so much for sharing that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for asking again. I could talk about that for a long time, but that's the gist of it. Hopefully, that wasn't too rambly, but
Oh no, no, that was perfect, I think.
great.
I do have a couple follow-up questions on that
Mhm.
subject. For one, I from what I've heard, and you've already kind of inferred the work-life balance. Your life is pretty busy because of working as a doctor.
Yeah.
What does a day look like for you, and then being able to fit Pokemon into that schedule? Because from what I understand, you have pretty long days usually.
Yeah, so I work as my specialty is internal medicine, which means I am a generalist for adult medicine. Um, and that means I will either fix your problems or refer you to the correct specialist who can then fix your problems. And so a big part of that is making correct diagnoses and coming up with the right treatment plans. It's something I do on a regular basis. Most people in internal medicine work in hospitals nowadays. Not all, but it's kind of trending that direction. So the hospital job is sort of an all or nothing kind of gig. On the bright side, when you're off, you're totally off, which is great. You don't get called about things. You don't have patients to see in the office. You can pretty much do whatever you want. When you're on, you have 12-hour shifts, which are kind of all consuming. So, pretty hectic work environment at times. It's certainly interesting, I think, and you get a lot of variety as an internal medicine doctor in a hospital. So I like those aspects of it. The way that the schedule kind of works out is typically you work 7 days in a row, and those are 12-hour shifts. And then after that, you get 7 days off in a row. So obviously, most of my play testing happens during those off weeks. And the testing schedule is kind of dependent on what else I'm doing as far as my hobbies and what tournaments are coming up and what kind of travel plans I have for my weeks off as well. So it's a 50-50 proposition at this stage in my life, which is much better. In med school and residency, it was a lot worse than that and a lot harder to get to tournaments. So
Yeah. And you did also mention earlier about hopefully being able to have a bit of a different schedule in the future, being able to kind of chase a world's invite more consistently. Do you have kind of a plan on where you want to see yourself, at least career-wise, in a few years? I know it's not really Pokemon related at this point at all, but I am a
yeah,
little curious.
well, it's tangentially related, right? Because
Yeah,
it
it
is
will
a
affect your
priority.
ability to play Pokemon, so it does.
Yeah,
It's a crucial importance.
it's a priority for my quality of life, right? If I have no flexibility in my schedule, in like this year, I just had really bad luck for the first 10 major events in North America and internationals. I've been working for 9 of them. Just unfortunate. I got championship points at the one event I went to, but 30 CPs probably not going to cut it this year. Not expecting to go to Japan, but um, in the future, what I'd like to have is a little more flexibility. So if I know the tournaments are coming up in advance, can I go to a scheduler and say, hey, can I have this time off, please? And that would be a huge bonus, especially to internationals, because the experience is bigger. I love to travel anyway, and the championship point payouts are a lot higher. So that would be the dream. And I think I have it lined up. We'll see how it works out in practice, but I have a new job lined up for early 2024, which has a couple of perks. One is an extra month off per year. So instead of strictly 7 days on, 7 days off, it's 5 months per year. And your bonus week 4 times a year will give you a 3 week break. So that's a lot of extra space in the schedule for one, but also it's a bit more flexible because you can request those vacation weeks, when there's an international Pokemon tournament, for example. So I'm finishing out my contract at my current job, and we'll start that early next year. And I'm hoping that that will lead to more consistent tournament attendance for me. And if anything, it will at least be slightly better than what I have now. But that is in the works long term. I'm pretty excited about it.
Oh, that's great to hear. Congratulations on, on the future gig.
Thanks.
I hope it goes well.
Yeah.
This question I might be kind of pulling it a little bit out of the blue. Do you think that the length of your shift as a doctor and the amount of mental and physical energy you have to do during those long periods of time has in any way helped you when it comes to the physical side of going through long Pokemon tournaments?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I don't know. There's certainly an endurance aspect to playing a major event that works in my favor. Um, I don't think that my experience as a doctor directly helps in that, but that's just for me. The reason I say that is I think I have an intrinsic ability to focus very intensely when something is very stimulating and interesting to me. And I've always had that with video games as a kid, strategy games, with studying at school. It's very useful to have that
Definitely a good skill to
ability.
have.
Yeah, it helps me get into grades that you need to get into medical school. The other thing that's massively huge for is standardized tests. I am very, very good at standardized tests because it's nothing but puzzles that you have to figure out and analyze the data available. It's always been something I've enjoyed, which is a strange thing to say because everybody else seems to hate them. But I love me some standardized tests, and that helps me get to my career today.
Yeah,
And that also is really useful at a Pokemon tournament. So I've noticed a strong trend as the day goes on at a major event. My record improves drastically, and I notice my opponents start to look tired and they start to make misplays. And I actually get stronger as the day goes on because I'm warmed up and I'm totally engrossed in what I'm doing. And so I think that's just a quirk to being me. It is really useful sometimes. It's not always useful, but for what it is, there is some overlap there in that I can tolerate a long shift that's busy because I have to figure things out and help people. In the same way at a long Pokemon tournament, the more it goes on, the more I'm just all in, completely focused on what I'm doing. And so that is definitely a strength of mine, something that works in my favor. But I don't think that being a doctor really assisted with that at all because I already had it beforehand.
hmm
That's kind of what helped me get into the position in the first place. So
yeah. It's not that being a doctor trained you for the
yeah,
physical endurance of a tournament. It's that that's a skill you have that shows itself in all these different forms in your life.
yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Before we get wrapped up here, for anyone listening who is interested in hearing more from you and learning more from you about the game, where can people find you?
So I'm on Facebook, Kevin Krueger, Krueger. I respond to messenger requests, so you can get a hold of me there. I started a Twitter several months back, Krieger TCG, and I will respond there as well. So if you have questions about a specific deck or a format, I'm usually down to share lists and just have discussions. And I really enjoy doing that. And I'm trying to grow a better network. So by all means, feel free to reach out. If you see me at tournaments, you can say hi as well. I do get a little bit socially tired at big events, so I might not look super approachable. But if someone does recognize me and wants to say hi or chat, you can always message me and say, "Hey, I want to meet up." I'm totally down. Or if you just say hi out of the blue, I'm happy to chat. I just may not be giving off those vibes because I'm tired and focused, and I'm a bit of an introvert, so I probably want to initiate, but I'm try to be approachable if you kind of take that step. I'm happy to chat anytime.
Hmm. And actually, now that I think about it, one final question before we get to our closing read. If anyone is interested in meeting you at a tournament, you do have kind of a distinctive look at tournaments usually. Could you tell us a bit
Yeah.
about that before we finish up?
Oh man, yeah, good times. So when I started playing League Cups, I went to a Chicago Cup where I, made a lot of my friends in the game, including you, really. So uh, I decided to wear my comfiest pants because I was off for the weekend after a really busy week, and I said I'm just going to be as comfy as possible. I don't care what I look like. So I had these pajama pants on, and I ended up winning the cup. It was a pretty big competitive cup. Super duper fun day. Um, it was the second cup I ever won, but the first one was much smaller and less competitive. And so I sort of became known locally for that a little bit. And then once I started going to bigger tournaments, I said, this will just be funny. I'm here to have fun anyway, so let's embrace it. We'll wear my lucky pants. And it's Pillsbury Doughboy themed. It says that's how I roll. They're very comfortable still, so
They look very
I do
comfortable.
enjoy wearing them. Yeah. And I was thinking, well, I also want to be professional though. So I decided to wear a jacket with pajama pants as a fun combo. Um, so you might see me wearing that. Maybe not on day two. Usually I just put a long sleeve T-shirt on and call it good. But um, oh man, it's a good time. I
Yeah,
like I said, I'm there to have fun and play weird decks, and if that includes dressing a little strange, it's all part of it.
of
But
course.
hey, if that helps someone recognize me, that's great. Yeah.
Hopefully, we can get you on stream day one someday.
Hopefully, I still have never been on stream. It's on my Pokemon TCG bucket list. I had to win it in with Corviknight. They chose not to stream it. It was actually an
That
awesome
is
game, and I
rough.
made a
That
good
is
friend out
rough.
of it too. But anyway, someday.
You definitely deserve it.
Thanks.
On that note, we will wrap up. Thank you again for your time. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Super fun.
Of course. Have a good one.
See ya.
Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you to Kevin for spending this time with us. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. If you're interested in hearing more conversations like this one, please consider giving the podcast a follow, a review, or rating wherever you're listening. If you want to follow us on social media, you can subscribe to our YouTube or follow our podcast on Twitter at memcappodcast. If you want to see me post about my own TCG experiences, you can follow me on Twitter at RZGladys. I hope you have a great day, and thank you for listening.